Nigeria is currently at a very dark place with its finances. Its government has for years been struggling with its revenues, but now it seems the glue that was holding it together has started to come apart, and the government's finances are falling apart. It's got so much into debt that what it pays out to service that debt has now exceeded the revenue it earns. That surely is a very self-destructive place to be, and that is a place that the next government will be when it arrives in 2023, ensnared into disproportionate debt by the profligacy of past administrations. As Nigerians wake up to this new sobering reality, how is this fall from financial grace likely to affect their future? What ingenious plans and ideas will the incoming government have to come up with to get by and make life in this country more livable? What will be the toll and long-term costs? With Nigeria fast becoming a place built to prevent joy for its citizens, how will the new government and the people learn to steal and feel joy in a world of such broken, almost subversive despair? Well, we'll be considering all that and more with our two analysts who are with me for the rest of the program to offer their perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. The journalist, policy strategist and Arise News analyst Waziri Adio, who was once the head of the Nigerian government agency NITI that was auditing the oil sector. And also with me is the international economist, political analyst, Christian Udechukwu, who's also CEO at Business Africa Events Limited. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Let me come to you, Waziri, because I read your, brilliant article digesting all of this. I think you wrote it for This Day newspaper. I wonder if you can reflect for a moment on Nigeria's debt crisis and the news that the amount of money spent servicing the debt has now exceeded government revenue.
It's a very concerning moment, a very humbling and sobering moment, and a moment that should give all of us a reason to pause, especially those who are, planning to take over government from next year, and not just them, but the rest of us as citizens. It has really, significant implication for our public finance, going forward. This it was a crisis. Is a crisis well foretold. It's not like something that happened, by accident. People have always been.
You could see it coming.
Yes, it's been long coming. If you recollect, last year, revenue to debt to revenue was lost like almost 100%, and that was the time when the bells should be ringing. But government had a way of putting it. And they go for a very convenient metric, which is debt to GDP ratio. Yeah, right. And if you look at that, it's very comforting because our total debt stock for the country is 39.5 trillion naira, and that's about 22% of our GDP, right? But it's not GDP that pays debt.
That's a very good point.
From your revenue.
Yeah.
So what we have come to now is you have a situation where if you are earning 1 million naira, right, as your revenue, you need 1.2 million naira to service your debt only.
So that means you're going to keep borrowing. Basically.
You have to borrow to even service your debt.
Yeah.
So you need to, so how do you do all that? How do you pay for staff? How do you pay for overhead? How do you pay for capital expenditure? So you are not just owing, you are not just borrowing to service your debt. You are also paying, you are also borrowing to take care of even the basic of things. And you know what? It's going to get worse. Because the more you borrow, the more you need to service the debt. So the proportion of the revenue that you're going to use to service the debt will be increasing. And this is also happening at a time when ordinarily our revenue should be going up because of the increase
in
oil
prices and so on.
The budget benchmark for oil, the budget benchmark price for oil is $73 per barrel. Oil from January to April sold for an average of $103 per barrel. In fact, in March, it went as high as $122 per barrel. So on the average, you've had oil selling for more than $30 above the budgeted price. But you know what? The revenue from oil actually shrank by 60%. So we have we have not just a debt problem, we have a revenue problem. And when you look at why that the income from oil is shrinking, is attributed to many things. That's attributable to many things. One is that our production is shrinking. Our OPEC quota is 1.6, 1.8.
So the amount of oil we're actually producing,
we're actually struggling to meet our OPEC quota. Right. That is one. Two, the bulk of the money we should be making from oil, from high oil prices, is going to subsidy. So whatever high oil prices gives, subsidy takes.
Well, you got me feeling really gloomy.
Yeah,
I'm getting pretty depressed. I don't know how you feel, Christian, because I mean, I've heard the argument made that, oh, don't worry too much about it. It's like having a credit card. I mean, you know, you take out your credit card, you know, as long as you don't max it out, your credit card, you know, you got 20,000, you know, naira or pounds or whatever on it. And you go and buy things, and you buy, and then you're earning £5,000, but you're paying £200 a month, and then you go on, and unless I mean, as long as you're able to arrest it before it then goes, you know, too badly, you're still in good nick. I mean, do you agree that with debt servicing exceeding government revenue, that this is a destructive place to be, as Waziri Adio was saying?
Yes, Charles, thank you for having me on the program. I think that the debt scenario that we've just gone through now is a very dark place for Nigeria to be. And there's no easy way out, primarily because the crisis is one of strategic leadership planning and production. So there's a production crisis in Nigeria. The productivity rate is falling instead of rising. In the last 5 years, the GDP growth rate has been just perhaps about 2.3, 2.5 max. And you know, when your growth rate is flat, it means there's no energy in the system. And I don't mean energy in terms of electricity power and all that, which is on its own is a unique problem to have. But it means that there's no productive energy in the system. You know, you don't feel that there's a lot happening. You have an economy that is under siege, security-wise. And so entrepreneurs and farmers and workers and students are not as productive as they should be. Everybody is filled with trepidation. So, you know, most meetings are virtual now. People are not, you know, in constant movement as they should be. The movement of goods themselves are, in some cases, even restricted. So it's a very dire place to be. So I'm not looking at the crisis.
So when you then add to that the issue of debt, is what you're saying? It's
well,
like,
yes, I'm not simply looking at it as a debt crisis.
Right.
I'm just simply saying that Nigeria is not as productive a nation as it should be. There was a time when our oil production was at about 2.5 million barrels, peak time, not so long ago. Most people still remember. So if we are at 1.2, 1.3, when our quota at OPEC is 1.8 million barrels per day, surely everybody in that sector should be feeling very restless. And if a significant portion of that is lost to theft, oil theft, then surely also a lot of security people and, you know, the economic managers of the nation should be losing sleep over that. We have arable farmland of about 34 million that is cultivable. And, you know, a year ago, you know, it was admitted somewhere in the presidency that at about 2.5% of that land was being cultivated. So how can you have 34 million hectares of land, arable farmland, and when you watch videos of clips from Ukraine, you see how massive the production fields are.
They're feeding the world.
Why shouldn't we be doing that? You drive 200 kilometers or 250 kilometers from Abuja to Kano, on both, you know, I mean, to Kaduna, on both sides of the road, are arable lands that should be under cultivation, but they're not. You go to Malaysia from one part of the town, of the city, Kuala Lumpur, to other. There's no side of the road that you don't see massive agricultural work going on. So we're not a productive nation as it is now. And perhaps because, you know, a lot of the crisis that we're going through has been there for some time, but there's not a lot of strategic thinking going into how do we solve the problem. So what I say is, we have this debt crisis now. Does anybody actually own the problem? because somebody needs to own it and decide that this is a problem that needs to be solved.
Well, that's a very interesting point. Let me bring you in, Waziri Adio, because that was going to be my question. We've identified the problem. You've done excellent analysis on it. What are the metrics that will allow us to do well? For instance, a new incoming government. What would be the metrics that will allow them to still do well in those circumstances?
Well, let me start with saying that I've listened to the leading candidates and also looked at some of their policy documents, and it's very surprising, very alarming that they are not coming up with concrete ideas. They're carrying on as if it's business as usual. That we're actually in a good place. We are not. Everybody should be alarmed, right? And this is the time. One of the things that you get from a campaign is that people bring up ideas, and you start debating those ideas.
I do have to say that Peter Obi has often raised that alarm, though. I mean, maybe not as robustly as he ought to, but he's raised that alarm.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't heard the other candidates raising
the point
same
I'm
alarm.
making is not about just raising, saying,
but coming up with solutions, basically.
And coming up with concrete things.
Yeah.
And not just about, we're going to solve the debt crisis. This is the time we should be having that conversation.
Right.
So what are you going to do? One of the things we have been running away from in this country is that we have been lying to ourselves. We believe we're a rich country. In actual fact, we are not. Right? In my article, I mentioned the federal budget, for Nigeria in 2022, which happened to be the record budget so far, 17.32 trillion naira. When you convert that to dollar, that's $41 billion for a population of 206 million people, right? So it's not just a debt problem that we have. The major problem we have as a country is revenue. We're not generating enough for our size and our need. If you compare our budget with the one for South Africa has a population of 59 million people, and it has a budget of $128 billion. Egypt has a population of 102 million people, and it has a budget of $111 billion, right? So even when you look at the budget per capita, is too small for what we need to face up. We need to get rid of this lie that we're a rich country. We're not a rich country, because whatever you have, by the time you divide it by your massive population, it's insignificant. So we need to generate more revenue. Let me say this very quickly,
briefly, because I need to
very quickly. If you compare our revenue to GDP ratio, right? Our revenue to GDP ratio is about 8%. That's the lowest even in Africa. The average in Africa is 18%. So we're not leveraging our GDP. And so we need to face up, we need to raise more revenue, we need to cut leakages, and things like subsidy, they need to go. We have to repurpose it.
Those are very, very good points. And I hope the people who make decisions are listening. But let me come to you, Christian Udechukwu, because let's not just nail the government to the cross. Let's sort of assess what they've done. Do you think this debt is justifiable debt? Or is it odious, part of the profligacy of government?
I think it is a case of profligacy because we're not cutting the cloth according to our size per se. According to the cloth, the size of the cloth per se, but we are cutting it to fit us. We have most of the debt actually goes to recurrent expenditure, paying salaries and all. There's nothing that says that the government cannot downsize workers, especially if the productivity level is as low as it is. There's no reason not to shed weight.
Yeah, but what do you do with those people when you downsize them? They just get on the unemployment.
You reskill them, you reskill them, and you reassign them to the other economic sectors where there's growth. Okay, and then on the capital expenditure side, there's nothing that says that most of the current expenditure, capital expenditure that absorbs a lot of this borrowing must be fully funded by government. No, there's a lot of creative ways and means of funding capital projects that will not be a strain on the purse of government. And if we have opportunity to grow our revenue, why can't we do that? I mean, I remember Kaduna State government was one time boasting that we have more gold in Kaduna than the whole of South Africa. So why is that gold not coming out? We have more gold being exported out of Zamfara, according to the World Gold Council in London. Why is Zamfara State not accounting for that gold to the federal government of Nigeria? So there's a lot of things that, you know, you have a lot of crimes going on, but you have no punishment. So it's not surprising that we're in this poor state for Nigeria.
Well, this is something we're going to be talking about for a while to come. It's always fascinating talking with you guys. You know, Waziri, we just never seem to have enough time, but hopefully one day that will happen. Waziri Adio is, of course, the journalist, policy strategist, and Arise News analyst, and Christian Udechukwu is an international economist of repute and a political analyst as well. Thank you very much indeed.